He screamed, "You're dead to me," and walked out, leaving a grandmother frozen at the dinner table, holding a silence that would echo for years. But what he didn't know is that she'd already begun stitching something in secret, something made of memory, forgiveness, and the kind of love that doesn't ask to be seen. What was inside the wooden box she left him after her death would unravel everything he thought he knew. If you've ever wondered how love survives silence, or what a single act of quiet grace can mean to a broken family, this story will stay with you long after it ends. The words echoed long after the door had closed behind him. "You're dead to me." This was the kind of thing you only ever heard in movies, spoken in anger, a line delivered for maximum sting. But Eli hadn't said it like a performance. He'd said it like a verdict, like he meant it. For the next few days, the house moved differently. I moved differently. The air in each room felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of that moment. I washed the dishes slowly, not because I was tired, but because silence somehow needed to be filled with the sound of running water and clinking plates. His words hung in the spaces between rooms, not always audible, but always there. My daughter called the next morning. Her voice was thin and careful, like she was testing the floor for cracks. "He didn't mean it," she said. "He's a teenager. They say things." I told her not to worry, told her I was fine, but I wasn't fine. I was hollow. It's like something had been scooped out of me. And now I had to walk around pretending I didn't feel the absence. That afternoon, I found myself reaching for the quilt. I'd been sewing for Eli's high school graduation. Was half done, folded neatly in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I ran my fingers over the patches, scraps of shirts he used to wear when he was little, bits of fabric from family trips, even an old pillowcase with dinosaurs on it from when he was 5 and insisted on bringing it everywhere. I'd stitched each square by hand, imagining the day I'd give it to him and the look on his face when he recognized the memories sewn into every thread. But now I folded the quilt back up, slower this time, and closed the chest. I kept trying to replay what I had said at the dinner table, over and over, like rewinding a tape. "Your father used to help me in the garden." That was it. That was the spark. But it wasn't just about what I said. It was what he heard. And what he'd been carrying that I hadn't seen. Eli's father, my son, died when Eli was 9. A car accident. Quick, senseless, brutal. And I suppose we all tried to carry that. Lost differently. I'd buried myself in casseroles and Sunday services. My daughter-in-law moved away, tried to start over. And Eli, well, he grew up in the shadows of things that were never said out loud. Maybe I mistook silence for healing. Maybe I thought that just being there was enough. But maybe he needed something else, something I didn't know how to give. The worst part of hurtful words isn't just how they sound when they're spoken, it's how they settle in the quiet afterward. I started noticing all the reminders. The mug he gave me when he was 12 that read "World's Okayest Grandma," still in the cupboard, the handle chipped. The guitar pick he'd dropped behind the sofa cushion years ago. The drawing he made of us in crayon, framed and hung in the hallway. A stick figure version of me with big glasses and an apron. One night, opened a drawer and found an old voicemail I'd saved. Eli was maybe 11 then. "Hi, Grandma. I just wanted to tell you I got an A on my science test. Also, I love you. More than cookies, bye." His voice was high-pitched and bright, the kind of sound that slips through time like a window opening. I must have listened to that message 6 times that night, memorizing the way he said cookies. But no amount of memories could undo what had been said at the table. And the truth was, I wasn't sure if anything ever could. Because once certain words are spoken, especially by someone you love, they change things. Not always forever, but enough. I told myself he didn't mean it, that he was angry, hurt, that he was too young to understand what words like that really do. But another part of me, on older, quieter part, knew that sometimes the words we don't mean can still leave damage in their wake. It reminded me of something my own mother used to say when I was a girl. Words are seeds. Ida. Some grow into flowers, others into weeds you'll never fully pull. I used to think she meant gossip or lies. But maybe she meant pain too. The kind that gets planted deep, grows slow, and shows up when you least expect it. The house stayed quiet after that. I stopped checking the front window every time a car passed. I stopped expecting his name to light up on my phone. I went about my days in the slow, deliberate way widows and grandmothers do. I tended my garden, folded my laundry, refilled the bird feeder. But every evening when the porch light clicked on automatically at dusk, I'd find myself glancing out anyway, just in case. Before Eli was born, I used to imagine what kind of grandmother I'd be. I pictured Sunday afternoons spent baking cookies, walks to the park, birthday cards filled with glitter, and long phone calls that ended with "love you more." I wanted to be the kind of grandmother who left behind a trail of soft memories. The kind children carry into adulthood like tucked-away treasures. When Eli arrived, all pink fists and squinting eyes, he made a sound like a complaint. I laughed. He was barely 2 minutes old and already letting the world know it hadn't met his expectations. I remember holding him in that hospital room, the afternoon sun crawling slowly across the linoleum floor, and whispering promises into his hair. I told him I'd always be there, that I'd never be far, that he could count on me. And for a while, he did. He spent more weekends at my house than not. When his parents were working long hours or needed a night to themselves, I was the one who picked him up from school, helped him with math homework, tucked him into bed with a story and a glass of water just in case. He had a way of talking with his whole body, always moving, always asking. He once asked me why the moon followed. Our car, I didn't know the science well enough to explain, so I told him the moon liked us best. He believed me. At that age, he believed everything I said, but children grow, and growing means shifting. He got taller, his hugs got quicker, his questions got shorter. Somewhere between boyhood and adolescence, he began closing doors his bedroom, his heart, his trust, not all at once, not in a dramatic sweep. Just slowly, like a house being emptied room by room. I should have noticed sooner, should have asked better questions. But I told myself this was just the way of things. Teenagers withdraw. It's natural, it'll pass. I clung to that idea like it was a float in rising water. Even when the phone calls stopped. Even when he stopped coming over. Even when I'd sit through entire dinners without him looking up. From his screen, there was a time he'd bring me drawings of dragons and superheroes. Then, without explanation, the drawings stopped. The silences grew longer. One Thanksgiving, he left halfway through the meal to sit in the car. Said he had a headache. I let him go. Didn't ask him to stay. That might have been the first. Real fracture small, but sharp. I knew he missed his father. Course he did. We all did. But I suppose I convinced myself that our shared grief might keep us close. That it would be a bridge. I didn't realize it had become a wall. The loss of my son left a hollow space in all of us. But grief doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it isolates. Everyone handles it differently. My daughter withdrew into structure schedules, appointments, control. Eli turned inward. And me. I tried to keep the memories alive. Maybe too much. Maybe what I saw as honoring the past, he saw as never letting go. Still, I never imagined a day when he'd look at me with such distance in his eyes. Like I was a stranger trying to rewrite his story. That birthday dinner felt like a collision. But it had been coming for years. It's the weight of unspoken things, misunderstandings. It's the small accumulations of hurt that neither of us knew how to name. There's a quiet kind of heartbreak that comes with watching someone you love turn cold. It's not loud. It doesn't break plates or slam doors. It just stops calling, stops looking you in the eye, stops trusting that you're on their side. I kept every birthday card he ever made me. Crayon hearts. Stick figure versions of us holding. Hands a glitter-covered "I love you." Grandma, that still sheds sparkle when I open the drawer it's in. He once called me his best grown-up. He wrote that in blue marker when he was 8. I found it last week tucked inside a school folder with a sticker chart and an A on a spelling test. I held the paper in my lap and read those words over and over. Best grown up. And I wondered when that stopped being true. Or if maybe I'd just stopped earning it. When people talk about family, they always say love is unconditional. But what they don't say is that it still needs tending. Like any garden, it withers if ignored too long. And when it wilts, you start to wonder, was I enough? Did I say the right things? Did I show up in the right ways? Now the silence between us feels like another kind of loss. Not loud, not sudden, but real all the same. I still keep my phone ringer on at night just in case. I still set out one too many plates on accident. Or maybe not on accident. Maybe habit is just another word for hope. And maybe, just maybe, some part of him still remembers the moon following our car. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to. He was barely 2 years old. And the word came out garbled gamma, like he wasn't quite sure how it was supposed to sound, only that it belonged to me. It wasn't my name exactly, but it was the first time he gave me one. Small gift of recognition. One I hadn't asked for but would carry with me for the rest of my life. He was sitting in my lap, one sock off and the other half hanging, gripping a plastic spoon like it was a magic wand. I'd been reading him a picture book for the third time that afternoon, the one about the bear who lost his hat. He turned around suddenly, looked up at me with serious eyes, and said, "It gamma." Then he laid his head against my chest, like that word had found its rightful place. I don't know why that moment stayed with me so clearly. But in a life full of noise and loss and ordinary days, there are some things your mind polishes like heirlooms. That was one of mine. He was a noisy little boy, always running, always asking, "Okay," always reaching for something just out of his own grasp, and I loved it. Okay. I loved that boundless energy, that unfiltered joy. When I watched him explore the garden, I didn't see a child, I saw the next chapter of something beautiful. He'd crouch down and whisper secrets to earthworms. He once gave a dandelion a proper funeral, said it had worked too hard, turning into wishes. When I babysat, he'd curl beside me on the couch, both of us wrapped in an old knit blanket. We'd eat saltine crackers and apples, and I'd let him press the remote buttons as if he were operating a spaceship. He called it Grandma TV, even though it was just reruns of old cartoons and weather reports I forgot to change. The bond came easy then. I didn't need to earn it. I just had to show up. When his parents separated, he spent even more time with me. I tried to make things soft for him, predictable. His favorite cereal in the cabinet. The stool he liked for brushing his teeth still by the sink. I bought a nightlight shaped like a moon and told him it would follow him into his dreams. The way the real one followed our car. He trusted me in a way that made the world feel safe again. After I lost my son, his father, it was Eli, who unknowingly gave me purpose. On the worst nights, when I couldn't sleep, I'd sit in the rocking chair outside his room and listen to the rhythm of his breath. And in those quiet moments, I let myself believe we were going to be okay. That love could outlast grief if you just held on tightly enough. The older he got, the more the words changed. He called me Gran for a while, then G, then sometimes just, "Hey." I didn't mind. What mattered was the look in his eyes when he saw me at the end of a school play or holding his birthday cake. That look, that flicker of safety and knowing was louder than any name. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The visits stopped being automatic. I had to ask, and I had to ask again. Conversations grew shorter, smiles turned polite. And I began to wonder if the boy who once gave dandelions funerals was still in there somewhere, buried beneath headphones and sarcasm and whatever heartbreaks teenage boys don't have words for. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch and look out at the street, remembering how he used to ride his scooter up and down the sidewalk, pretending it was a motorcycle. He'd wave every time he passed, like I was the crowd cheering him on. I'd wave back, of course. Always did. I kept the drawing. He made the year he started kindergarten me with a big smile and yellow hair, even though mine's always been gray. At the bottom, he wrote, "Grandma is my best friend." I framed it, hung it in the hallway. Later, when he was 13 and came over, he laughed at it. "Why'd I give you yellow hair?" he asked. I shrugged. "Maybe you saw something I didn't." He didn't say anything after that. Walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge without asking. The day he shouted those words, "You're dead to me." That drawing was the first thing I saw when I walked back into the hallway after. He left. I stood there for a long time staring at it, wondering if that version of us still existed in some corner of his memory, untouched by whatever had twisted things between us. Maybe it's foolish to hold on to moments from so long ago. Maybe it's just something the older generation does, clings to scraps of love like their full meals. But I don't think it's foolish. I think it's survival. Memory can be a form of grace. He doesn't call me anything now. Doesn't call at all. But I still whisper his name in my prayers. I still say goodnight, Eli, when I pass the guest room, just in case kindness travels, even in silence. And every once in a while, I pull out that old drawing. I run my finger along the line of stick figures. Me smiling, him holding my hand, still trying to believe there's a part of him somewhere that still does. There used to be a framed photo of Eli on the mantel. Taken the summer he turned 10. He was standing beside me in the backyard holding a crooked birdhouse we'd made together, his hands still smudged with paint, mine steadying the base while he grinned with all his teeth. The sun had caught in his curls that day. I remember how proud he was, not just of the birdhouse, but of having built something with his own hands. For years, that photo sat right in the center of the mantel. It was flanked by the usual family lineup, my wedding picture, a faded snapshot of my children as toddlers in the snow, a photo of my late husband in uniform. But Eli's photo always drew my eye first. It was full of color and life, of movement frozen in a better time. After that birthday dinner, after the door slammed and the house settled into its uneasy quiety, noticed the picture more often. Or maybe I noticed what it was doing to me. The way it stirred things I wasn't ready to feel yet. Anger, confusion, a sadness that wrapped itself around my ribs and didn't let go. So one afternoon, without ceremony or real decision, I took it down. I didn't throw it away. I'm not made that way. I simply placed it in a drawer in the sideboard, next to old letters and birthday cards, and shut it gently. The space on the mantel looked wrong afterward, like a sentence missing its verb. The photos on either side leaned inward, as if expecting him to return. My daughter noticed, of course. She came by the following week to drop off some soup and check in, though. She pretended it was about the soup. Her eyes flicked to the bare spot on the mantel as she handed me the Tupperware. "You moved his photo," she said quietly. I nodded, just for now. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Some things don't require explanation. They just hang in the air between two people who are both trying not to cry. I kept myself busy in the days that followed. Cleaned out the pantry, reorganized the linen closet, even ironed the curtains, which I hadn't done in years. But in the evenings, my eyes always returned to that empty space. It mocked me, accused me, reminded me it's strange how objects can hold so much weight, not just what they are, but what they represent. That photo wasn't just an imagette, was a stand-in for a relationship I couldn't seem to reach anymore. Removing it didn't change what had happened, but it softened the sharp edges just enough to get through the day. One night, I opened that drawer again and held the picture in my lap. I traced the edges of the frame with my fingers. He had been so young then, his hand gripping the hammer too tightly, his tongue poking out in concentration. I remember him looking up at me as we painted the little wooden roof and asking, "Will the birds really use it?" "Of course," I'd said. "Why wouldn't they? They might not like it. They'll love it, I promised, because you made it." That was the sort of thing I used to say without thinking. Now, I wonder if he ever believed it. Grief isn't just about losing someone to death. It's about losing the version of someone you once knew, the shape of a connection that no longer fits. I grieved Eli the way I grieved my son, quietly, in pieces. In the little ways love goes silent, I started noticing other absences. A painting he made in third grade that had hung on the fridge for years, gone now. The dinosaur mug he used when he stayed over, I'd pushed it to the back of the cabinet. Spare toothbrush still in the bathroom drawer. Untouched, but somehow more haunting than anything else. I'd become someone who rearranged a house to fit around absence. Someone who told herself maybe one day, a plan for never. A friend from church, Martha, asked me over coffee if I'd heard from Eli. I shook my head. She reached out and touched my wrist gently. They always come back, she said. Eventually. Sometimes it just takes growing up. I didn't say anything. It was a kind lie meant to soothe. But I didn't want lies. I wanted the truth. And the truth was, I didn't know if he would come back. I didn't know if he even wanted to. That's the hardest part about love. When it's wounded, you don't know if it's waiting to heal or if it's already moved on without you. That night, I lit a candle in the fireplace even though it wasn't cold. I sat in the quiet and stared at the mantel. I didn't put the photo back, not yet, but I did clear a little more space just in case. The worst kind of loneliness, I've come to learn, is the kind you feel when surrounded by your own blood. When the faces at the dinner table know your birthday and your middle name but can't seem to see when something's broken. There was a time when family meant Sunday suppers and hand-me-down jokes. When the clatter of dishes and laughter filled the rooms until you forgot what silence sounded like. But somewhere along the way, those gatherings grew quieter. Not in volume, but in connection. Words got shorter, smiles thinner, and love, once so effortless, began to feel like something we had to schedule. After Eli's outburst, things changed in ways no one wanted to acknowledge. My daughter stopped mentioning his name around me, as if protecting both of us from the sharpness it carried now. When I asked how he was doing, she gave me soft answers. He's fine. Busy with school. You know how teenagers are. But I didn't know any more. That was the problem. At Easter, the table looked the same on the surface. Deviled eggs, ham, green beans. My daughter brought a lemon tart this time instead of the usual pie. We all sat in the same seats we always had, but Eli wasn't there. He'd decided not to come. Or maybe he hadn't been asked. I wasn't sure which would have hurt more. There was an empty chair beside mine. No one moved it. No one commented. But I caught my younger granddaughter, Sophie, glancing at it now and then. She's only 9, but she notices things. Children always do. She asked later that night why Eli didn't come. I told her he had other plans. She looked skeptical. Used to sit next to you every year, she said. Maybe he forgot. Almost told her the truth. That sometimes people choose to forget what they aren't ready to face. But I just nodded and said, maybe. After everyone left, I stayed behind to wash the dishes. I told them I wanted the quiet. But what I really wanted was time. It's time to move through that empty house and sit in the aftermath without anyone watching. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, staring at Eli's old chair. It had a slight wobble, always did. He used to lean it back on 2 legs, no matter how many times I told him not to. I remembered the Christmas he got a model train and spent the whole evening building a track around the tree. He dragged that very chair across the floor, trying to get the right view. Still have the scratch marks in the wood. I never buffed them out. It used to make me smile. Now, I wasn't sure what they made me feel. Family is supposed to be the place you go when the world turns cold. But what happens when it's your family that does the turning? When love starts to feel like obligation and the conversations run out before the coffee does. I started noticing the small signs. It's the way people avoided lingering too long. It's the way no one asked if I wanted to host Thanksgiving this year. It's the way they texted instead of called. My daughter still came by with groceries. And updates from work. My son-in-law fixed the leaky faucet without being asked. But even those kindnesses started to feel like tasks on a list. Not because they didn't care, but because we were all performing the shape of closeness without the warmth they used to live underneath it. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of being the one who always kept the calendar, sent the birthday cards, made the plans. Tired of trying to mend something that no one else seemed ready to admit was broken. Some evenings, I would sit with a photo album in my lap. Not to wallow in the past, but to remind myself that once it had been different. That the smiles were real. That the arms thrown around my waist, the sticky kisses on my cheek, the whispered, "Don't tell Mom," all of that had lived here once. Now, I wasn't sure what we were. A group of people with overlapping last names. Maybe. People who knew how to pass the salt and ask about the weather. But not how to ask the hard questions. There's a kind of silence that creeps into families when no one wants to be the first to speak truth. When everyone is waiting for someone else to fix it. That silence had settled in like dust. And the longer it stayed, the more it seemed like part of the furniture. But I still left the porch light on at night. I still kept the gate latch oiled. And sometimes when no one was looking, I'd set out an extra plate, just to remember what it felt like when the table was full. It was December 3rd. It's the day I usually pulled down the red box from the top of the hall closet, the one with the faint smell of cinnamon and mothballs. Inside were the Christmas things ornaments wrapped in tissue, fraying garlands. The nativity scene with the chipped shepherd, and of course, the stockings. 5 of them stitched by hand over the years. Eli's was third from the left, green, with a crooked snowman and his name embroidered in red thread. Blocky letters from a time when I hadn't yet learned how to stitch neatly. I'd made it the year he was born. I remember staying up late, pricking my finger more than once, determined to finish it before his first Christmas. He had no idea what it was, of course. But I hung it anyway. A promise more than a decoration. Every year since, it had gone up on the mantel. Even the year his father died. Even the year he was too old to care about stocking stuffers. Even last year, when he barely said 2 words to me at the family dinner. I hung it because tradition matters. It's because family doesn't stop being family just because someone pulls away. But that morning, I stared at it in my hands for a long time. It felt heavier than usual. Not just in weight, but in memory. Noman's smile seemed almost cruel in the silence of the living room. I set it on the couch beside me and continued sorting through the box Sophie's stocking with the glittering stars. The angel my daughter made in 4th grade. The ceramic bell that only rang if you shook it just right. I hung up the others, careful and slow. I even found the tiny hooks in the same place I always did, tucked in the corner of the drawer with the rubber bands and batteries. But when I reached for Eli's stocking again, something in me hesitated. I pressed my thumb against his name, tracing the E, remembering how excited he'd been when he first recognized the letters as his. He must have been 3. He pointed at it and shouted, "Mine," with a grin that could have lit the whole room. That boy felt like someone I used to know. I stood in front of the mantel, stocking in hand, for what must have been 10 minutes. It would have been easier to just hang it, to pretend nothing had changed, to keep the appearance of wholeness. But the truth was, something had changed, and the space between us had grown too wide to ignore. So I folded the stocking gently, placed it back in the red box, and closed the lid. It wasn't an act of anger. Wasn't revenge, it was grief, small and quiet, like a closed door at the end of a long hallway. I sat on the couch afterward, staring at the 4 stockings now hanging in a neat, expectant row. They looked balanced, but not full. It's like a photograph with someone cropped out. Later that week, Sophie came over to help me decorate the tree. She placed the ornaments with careful hands, tongue poking out the side of her mouth in concentration. After a while, she stepped back and tilted her head. "Where's Eli's stocking?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Eventually, I said, "He's not coming this year." She nodded, thoughtful in that quiet way children can. B, when they're trying to understand the grown-up world. Will he come next year? I don't know. I told her. Maybe. She was silent for a moment, then reached for an ornament shaped like a candy cane. Can I hang it anyway? I nodded, and she placed it gently near the top of the tree. That? Night after she'd gone home, I sat by the fire, tea cooling beside me, and watched the lights blink across the branches. I tried to picture Eli's face. Not the way he looked at 17, angry and distant, but the way he looked at 6. Kneeling in front of the tree with cookie crumbs on his shirt, whispering to the presents as if they could hear him. The house was quiet, save for the tick of the old clock on the wall. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled, just accepted. I didn't put the stocking back up, but I didn't put it far away either. Stayed in the red box, tucked gently between layers of tissue, waiting. Not as punishment, not as farewell, just waiting. The days after Christmas always feel slower. The tree loses its shine, the cookies grow stale, and the lights seem to blink with less conviction. But that year, after I had packed away the stockings and stored the wrapping paper, the house didn't just feel quiet, it felt hollow. There's a kind of silence that lives in the walls when something has shifted inside a home. Not the peaceful kind that comes after a long day, but a silence that presses in from every direction. It's the kind you can't fix by turning on the radio or running the dishwasher. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The faint creak of the stair railing, the way the refrigerator hummed louder at night, the groan of the water heater in the basement, sounds that had always been there. Suddenly sharp and present, reminding me that the house was still alive, even if the warmth had gone missing. Sometimes I'd sit in the armchair by the front window and close my eyes, trying to remember what it had sounded like when Eli was little. I could still hear his footsteps pounding down the hallway, the way he used to yell, "Watch this," before doing something reckless. I remembered how he used to knock on the bathroom door just to ask if I had any cookies, how his laughter used to fill the kitchen while we baked banana bread, even though he never liked bananas. Now, there were days when I wouldn't speak out loud until evening. I'd catch myself whispering things to the kettle as it boiled, or to the cat who'd taken up residence on my porch despite not belonging to anyone. She came around more often. These days, I started calling her Marbles, though she didn't seem to care one way or the other. She didn't like being touched, but she stayed near. We kept each other company in the way two quiet creatures sometimes do. One morning, was dusting the hallway and came across a mark on the wallen old pencil line with Eli, age 9, scrawled beside it. I'd measured him there every year for a while until he asked me to stop. Said it was baby stuff. But I'd never erased the markings. They remained like rings on a tree trunk. It's proof that he had grown here. I stood there for a while, fingers grazing that faint line, remembering how he used to stand with his back against the wall, chin lifted, insisting he'd grown at least 2 inches since last time. I remembered how I'd always pretended to be amazed. Even when it was more like half an inch dot, it struck me how the house was full of him, even in his absence. The scratched wood on the banister from his toy cars, the faded crayon line beneath the kitchen table where he once tried to draw a racetrack, the tiny handprint in the cement out back placed there before it had fully dried. After he'd begged to leave a mark forever, and he had left marks everywhere, not just on the walls or floors, but on the fabric of my daily life. I started talking to him sometimes, not out loud, not exactly, just in the way memories speak when you lean into them. I'd fold laundry and think you always hated stiff towels. Or I'd stir soup and remember how he used to fish out the carrots before I could stop him. I knew it wasn't normal. Or maybe it was. Maybe this is what grief does when it has nowhere to go. It sits with you. It fills the space. It becomes a second silence layered over the first. That winter, I stopped listening to the news. The world felt too loud, too busy. I found myself rereading old books, the ones Eli had liked when he was small. I opened a box in the attic and found Where the Red Fern Grows with the corner chewed from when the dog was still alive. Inside, In clumsy handwriting, he had written, "Don't cry too much at the end, Grandma. I cried already." I didn't remember him writing that. But there it was. I kept that book on the coffee table after that. Not to read again, but to see. To remember. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in the dark and listen not to the house itself, but to what it remembered. The way homes do when they've been part of a life long enough. And I realized something. The house wasn't just quiet because Eli was gone. It was quiet because he used to fill it with sound. And when that sound disappears, the walls don't forget. They echo it back in small, subtle ways. You just have to listen. They didn't say anything outright, of course. That's not how things work on our street. We wave at each other from our driveways, borrow sugar, ask about the weather, and keep our questions folded neatly behind polite smiles. But I knew they noticed. You can always tell when people start noticing the absences more than the appearances. Eli hadn't been by in months. No more basketball bouncing in the driveway. No more loud music from the open car window. No more Sunday afternoons where I'd chase him back inside with a glass of lemonade and a reminder to put on sunscreen. Mrs. Atwood from across the street stopped me by the mailbox one morning. Her voice was sweetened with concern, but she wrapped it in the kind of tone that's meant to be casual. "Haven't seen your grandson around in a while," she said. "Used to mow your lawn, didn't he?" I nodded. "He's been busy." She smiled and nodded back, her eyes doing the part her mouth didn't. She wanted to ask more. People always do. But they don't. Instead, they file it away at it to whatever narrative they're building silently. The truth is, I'd always been proud of the way Eli showed up around here. When he was younger, he'd help Mr. Green carrying groceries. He once fixed a loose shingle on old Mrs. Langley's shed without being asked. He'd built a little reputation as a good kid, the kind of boy who still said, "Yes, ma'am," without rolling his eyes. And now, his absence rang louder than a slammed door. I heard the whispers before I ever admitted them to myself. Not mean-spirited, but curious. "I wonder what happened. Used to be so close to her. Teenagers, right? It's amazing how gently people can speculate. How softly they can lay down their judgments like a quilt over something they don't understand." At church, it was worse. There were glances when I walked in alone. Some kind-hearted folks offered invitations, join us for lunch, sit with us at the potluck, but others just watched from a distance. I imagine they thought I was being stubborn, or maybe that I'd pushed Eli away somehow. Maybe they thought I'd said something unforgivable, and maybe I had. I never corrected them. I never explained the dinner table, the slammed door, the words he'd thrown at me like stones. I didn't see the point. Pain doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes the hardest part of heartache is knowing you have to carry it quietly, while the world keeps turning as if nothing's happened. One afternoon, I found a note in my mailbox. No name, just a folded piece of lined paper that read, "Kids don't mean what they say when they're angry. Don't let it be the last word." I held on to that note for a long time. I don't know who left it. Maybe someone who'd been through something similar. Maybe someone who saw more than they let on. Still, I started going out less. I didn't want to explain the missing stocking. I didn't want to talk around the hole in my life like it wasn't there. So I made excuses. Told people I had errands, or wasn't feeling well, or just needed a quiet afternoon. It was easier to let them draw their own conclusions than to try and explain something I barely understood myself. And yet, even in my withdrawal, the world went on. Children played in sprinklers. Mail was delivered. Lawns were trimmed. People smiled and waved. And Eli's name was spoken less and less. Sometimes I wondered what he thought they believed. Whether he knew how his absence had begun to reshape the story of who he was in this neighborhood. Whether he even cared. But there was one moment that stayed with me. It was late autumn. The leaves had started to fall, and I was out front raking the yard. My back ached, and I'd been at it longer than I should have. I paused to rest, leaning on the rake, when a car drove slowly down the street. I didn't recognize the driver, but in the back seat, I caught a glimpse of someone who looked just like him. Dark hoodie profile, turned toward the window. He didn't wave. He didn't look back, and I couldn't be sure it was him. But my heart said it was. The car disappeared down the block. And I stood there a while longer, rake in hand. Wondering if he'd seen me too. Later that evening, Mrs. Atwood dropped off a slice of pumpkin bread. Made too much, she said, though she always made too much. Before she left, she lingered at the door. "He'll come around," she said gently, as if reading my thoughts. "They all do eventually." I didn't say anything. I just smiled and thanked her for the bread, but when I closed the door and stood in the hallway with my hands wrapped around the still warm plate, I realized I didn't need the whole neighborhood to understand what had happened. I just needed one person to care enough to come back. And for now, that person was still somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. Not yet. It's tucked in the back of my dresser drawer, inside a pale blue envelope that no longer has any real color to it. The ink has faded a little, the corners slightly curled. I must have rewritten it for maybe 5 times, folded and unfolded it more than I care to admit. I wrote it the night after Eli's words settled into the house like ash. When the lights were out and I could no longer distract myself with dishes or television or crossword puzzles, I only half finished. It was past midnight, and the world outside had grown still in that way it only does when winter is closing in. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The house was so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the same kind I used to use when helping Eli with homework. And I began to write, "Dear Eli," it began. Simple, plain, just the way I speak. I didn't know what I was going to say when I wrote those first words. I wasn't planning to defend myself, and I didn't want to scold. I just wanted to talk to him. Like I used to when he was little, when he'd crawl under the kitchen table after a bad day at school and say nothing for 10 whole minutes until I sat beside him with a glass of milk and asked nothing in return. I told him that I missed him, that the silence in the house had grown larger than either of us, that I knew the dinner hadn't gone the way either of us wanted. I admitted that I might have said the wrong thing, that I sometimes forget how different the world is for someone his age, that bringing up his father, my son, was never meant to wound, only to remember. And then I wrote something I hadn't said aloud to anyone, that I sometimes talk to his father when I'm folding laundry or tending the garden. Just small things, like the tomatoes came in strong this year, or Eli's gotten so tall you wouldn't believe it. And I told him that maybe I'd spent too many years talking to the past and not enough time listening to the present. I told him I still kept his stocking. I hadn't thrown anything away. I think the house still remembered him, even if he hadn't been by in a while. I stopped writing after a while, not because I had nothing left to say, but because the words had started trembling on the page, my hand unsteady from emotion more than age. I signed it simply, "Love, Grandma." I stared at the letter for a long time, thought about sealing it, thought about slipping it into his backpack at school, thought about giving it to my daughter to pass along, though I worried she'd read it first. But in the end, I didn't send it. I folded it carefully, slid it into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer. Because some words are for speaking. Others are for keeping safe until the time is right. And this letter, this one, felt like both. Some days I think about mailing it. Other days I think maybe I shouldn't. Not because I don't mean every word, because I worry what receiving it might do. Whether it would reopen something that had only just begun to scab over. There's a strange power in unsent letters. They hold all the honesty we're too afraid to speak. They give us a place to pour everything out without fear of echo. Letter became my conversation with a boy who no longer looked me in the eye. A way to keep the connection alive, even if only in the quiet. I've written others since then, shorter ones. Little notes on scraps of paper that I tuck away in books, or drawers, or between recipes. Things like, "I still keep your seat at the table," Or you loved this soup when you were 12. No one knows about them. Not even Sophie. Not even my daughter. They're my way of still being his grandmother. Even when he doesn't call me that anymore. The letter in the drawer hasn't moved in months. But I open it every now and then, just to read the words again. Just to remind myself that I said what needed saying, Evan, if only to the paper. Maybe one day, when the time feels right, I'll pass it along. Maybe he'll be grown, and the anger will have worn thin, and he'll be ready to hear it. Or maybe I'll be gone and someone else will find it, read it, and understand that silence was never the same as giving up. Until then, it stays where it is. Folded, quiet, waiting, just like me. The idea came slowly, like most important things do. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to change my will. It came to me over time in quiet moments, while folding towels or watering the garden or standing in front of the mantel, staring at the space where his photo used to sit. I had already written a will years ago, a practical kind divided evenly, names neatly spelled, signatures witnessed and notarized. It was stored in a manila folder in the safe, alongside my husband's discharge papers and the deed to the house. It was a document meant to settle things cleanly. But clean doesn't always mean complete. After Eli's outburst, after those, for words turned the air in my chest to gravel, I began to feel differently. Not vindictive, not spiteful, but something deeper. A need to leave something that told the truth, not about money or land or furniture, but about love, even the complicated kind. So I found the old wooden box. It had belonged to my mother. Dark walnut, smooth edges, a brass clasp that never quite latched properly. She used to keep her sewing scissors and spools of thread in it. After she passed, I'd stored it in the closet, unsure what to do with something so ordinary and so full of her. I pulled it down one afternoon and wiped the dust from the top. The hinges creaked the same way they always had. Inside, it still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. I decided it would hold what couldn't be said in person. Over the next few weeks, I began collecting things, not valuables, not heirlooms. Just pieces of a story that Eli might not know, might never have heard unless someone left them behind with care. The first thing I placed inside was a photo of him and his father. It had been taken at the county fair when Eli was 5. His father was holding him up so he could reach the prize shelf at the game booth. Eli's smile was crooked mid-laugh. His father's eyes looked tired but full. I hadn't shown that photo to anyone in years. It had lived in my wallet until the corners wore down. I pressed it flat and tucked it into the box. Next came the quilt square dot. It was just one piece of patch I had planned to sew into the quilt I was making for his graduation. Deep green, with tiny embroidered stars. I'd stitched his initials into the corner in pale blue thread. I ran my finger along the letters before folding it carefully and adding it to the others. A fragment of something unfinished. Like us. I found the letter Tutha, one I'd never sent tanned, placed it on top, still in its blue envelope, still unsealed, still waiting. Then came the watch, not mine. His father's. It hadn't worked in years. The leather strap was cracked and the face had a scratch down the middle, but he'd worn it every day from college until the accident. Eli used to play with it when he was little, slipping it over his wrist and pretending to be the boss of time. I'd kept it in my nightstand, unsure why. Now it had found its reason. The last item was a small piece of folded paper. Not a note, just a sentence written in my own hand. You don't have to forgive me, but I hope one day you'll understand I never stopped loving you. I didn't know if that was too much or not enough. But it was the only thing I was sure of. Once the box was full, I lined the inside lid with soft cloth and secured each item as best I could. The latch still didn't close properly. Never. Had I tied a ribbon around the outside to keep it shut, and I tucked it back into the closet just for a while later that week. I met with my attorney. He'd been handling my affairs for years. Knew me well enough to ask gently, "Something change?" When I handed him the updated document, I nodded. It's not a change in who gets what, just something more personal. Okay. He read through the papers, then looked up. Do you want this box delivered specifically to Eli? Yes, I said, but not right away, not while I'm still here. He didn't ask why, just nodded and made a note. I don't want him to feel guilt, I added quietly. I just want him to have the truth, something he can hold. Something. That doesn't vanish with me. He was silent for a moment, then closed the folder. I think he'll understand one day, he said. I hope so. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Not with worry, but with something that felt closer to peace. The kind that comes when you've done the best you can with the tools you've got. When you've planted the seed, even if you may never see it bloom, the wooden box is still in the closet. Quiet, waiting, like the stocking, like the letter, like me, Dot, and one day when I'm not here to explain or defend or fold napkins or offer second chances, maybe he'll open it. Maybe his hands will shake. Maybe he'll cry. Or maybe he'll just sit there in silence, and maybe, in that silence, he'll finally hear me. The law office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same dark green carpet, same ticking wall clock, same dusty artificial plant in the corner that tried to look like a ficus but never quite fooled anyone. The receptionist, Linda, still offered the same weak coffee in foam cups, still smiled like she remembered birthdays, even when she didn't. I sat in the waiting room longer than usual that morning, though I'd arrived precisely on time. I wasn't nervous, just still, like something in me had settled. My handbag rested on my lap, both hands folded over it, clutching the folder I'd brought with the updated documents. I'd written my instructions in longhand, in blue ink, careful and neat. Even under stress, I've always had good penmanship. When Mr. Callahan opened his door and said, "Ida, come on in," it was with the familiar warmth of someone who's seen you through years of paperwork and probate and small-town complications. He'd helped settle my husband's affairs after the stroke, and he'd been the one to notarize my first will. He never pried, but he listened better than most. His office smelled faintly of printer, toner, and lemon cleaner. There were framed certificates on the walls, a photo of his family at the lake. It's a worn leather chair that side when I sat down. I handed him the folder without ceremony. He flipped it open, scanning the first page. "You've updated the will," he said, more statement than question. And included an addendum. "Yes," I replied. "It's for Eli." He paused. "Your grandson." I nodded once. "But I don't want it delivered right away. Not unless I'm gone. It's not something he's ready for." He studied me for a long moment. "Do you mind if I ask why?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it aloud felt like admitting a bruise. "We aren't speaking," I said quietly. He said something hurtful. I haven't seen him since. Callahan didn't nod or offer a platitude. He just kept looking at me the way a good lawyer does come, steady, without judgment. I shifted. "In my seat, I don't want to leave him money," I said. "Not just money. It's not what this is. I've put together a box. It has things he may want or not. I suppose that part's up to him. You want to describe the contents for the file?" "No," I said. "Let it be personal. It's not something the court needs to inventory." Made a note, then returned to the papers. "You've named your daughter executor." "Yes, she understands why." Another pause. "Are you sure you don't want to try reconciliation while you're alive?" "A letter, maybe? A conversation?" "I've already written the letter," I said. "But I didn't send it. It's in the box." He closed the folder slowly, the soft thud of the cover landing with finality. "You've thought this through," he said. "I have." He leaned back in his chair. "I've seen a lot of wills, Ida. Seen families torn apart by what's left behind. Not left behind. But this. It's the first time I've seen someone leave space. Not answers, not explanations. Just space. That struck me more than I expected." I blinked, surprised at the sting behind my eyes. Maybe space is all we have left, I said. Maybe it's what lets something new grow later if it ever wants to. He handed me a copy of the documents, neatly clipped and labeled. I tucked them back into my handbag. As I stood to leave, he said, "If you change your mind, if something changes, you can update this anytime." I know. Linda smiled at me again on the way out. I nodded and said thank you, declining the coffee this time. Outside, the wind had picked up. Dry leaves scuttled across the sidewalk. I stood for a moment beside the parking meter, watching them swirl. I wasn't in a hurry to get home. That afternoon, I took the wooden box from the closet and placed it into a larger one, lined it with soft fabric, and added a note: "Deliver only if I'm no longer living." With care, then I returned it to the closet and slid the door shut. The legalities were done now. Signed, witnessed, filed. But it wasn't about legality. Not really. It was about finding a way to speak when you're no longer there to be misunderstood. About leaving behind something more lasting than disappointment. About saying, "I was here. I saw you. I never stopped loving you, even if you don't believe it yet. Even if it takes you years to open the lid." I found the old camera in the back of the hall closet, under a box of Christmas lights and behind a stack of jigsaw puzzles I hadn't touched in years. It was heavier than I remembered, dusty but still intact. A bulky gray Polaroid with a sticky shutter and the faint smell of plastic and time. Eli used to love that camera. When he was about 8, he went through a phase where he took pictures of everything: the garden hose, his peanut butter sandwich, the neighbor's cat Midyan. He'd line them up on the kitchen table like a museum exhibit, narrating each one with great seriousness. "This one's called Grandma's Shoes on the Porch. This one's Sky but Sideways." I never corrected his titles. Art, after all, is how we make sense of things we don't yet understand. The film was harder to find. I had to order it online, 3 packs. It's expensive, really, for something so outdated, but I didn't mind. I wasn't making a scrapbook or an album. I was making something quieter, something just for him. Over the course of a week, I took 12 pictures. One each day, always in the morning, always in silence. I didn't pose them or clean up first. I just captured the things I thought he'd forgotten or never noticed. To begin with, the first was the hallway wall, where the pencil marks still lingered: his name, his height, the years marked beside it in smudged handwriting. The second was the quilt square I'd never sewn, draped over the back of the rocking chair. Then the old toaster he once claimed burned like a dragon. The swing he fell from when he was 6 and insisted he didn't cry. The bookshelf where his father's copy of Holes still sat, cracked spine and all. Each photo developed in the palm of my hand, soft edges growing clearer with time. I watched them come to life slowly, as though the house itself was revealing what it had held on to in his absence. I wrote nothing on the backs, no captions, no explanations. Just slipped each one into its own envelope and tucked them into the wooden box between the quilt square and the letter I'd never sent. These weren't meant to teach him a lesson. They weren't mementos of guilt or proof of anything. They were, in their own quiet way, memories preserved not because they were extraordinary, but because they were ours. There's something about Polaroids. They can't be edited, can't be filtered or adjusted or polished. What you get is what you saw. That felt right. Honest. These were the truths of a home and a boy and a woman who once sat beside him during thunderstorms and told him stories until the thunder sounded less like fear and more like rhythm. The last photo I took was of the front porch. Just the porch, empty chair, faded cushion, screen door slightly ajar. I don't know why it felt like the right one to end on, but it did. Something about its stillness, about how it looked like it was waiting. I placed that one on top. The final envelope. Then I tied them all together with a piece of twine. It's the same kind we used to use to hang paper snowflakes across the windows in December. He never liked tape, said. It always pulled the paint dot later that day. I walked past the closet where the box now lived. I paused, hand on the doorknob, tempted to open it again. But I didn't. Not this time. Instead, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, camera still in my lap, thinking about the sound the old Polaroid made when it spit out a picture. A soft whir, a click, then silence. And waiting dot, always the waiting dot somewhere down the line, Eli might find those envelopes. He might open one or all. He might scoff or smile or close the lid and walk away. I don't know, but if he ever wonders what he meant to me, I hope he'll hold one of those images in his hand and feel it. Not just see it, feel it. The way love lingers. The way memory waits for you to come back. It started with a pile of laundry I couldn't bear to donate. Shirts that no longer fit him. Shirts he'd outgrown long before we outgrew each other. They were folded neatly in the back of the linen closet, stacked in a way only I understood by memory, not by color or season. There was the red flannel. He wore every fall from age 9 to 11, sleeves always slightly too long. The faded yellow t-shirt with a dinosaur that used to glow in the dark. The gray hoodie he left behind one spring after a weekend visit, still smelling faintly of bonfire smoke and shampoo. And the white button-down from his 8th grade graduation. I'd ironed it twice that morning, too proud to say anything but. Too nervous not to make it perfect. They were just shirts, really. Cotton and thread. But they felt like chapters. I'd been quilting for years, not professionally. Just quietly. Slowly, I liked the way it felt to stitch something together that had once been scattered. I liked that quilts held history not in the way museums do, but in the way kitchens and bedrooms and childhoods do. So one morning, I took down the shirts and began to cut. At first, I wasn't sure what I was making. A gift? A memory? An apology? Maybe all three. Maybe something simpler. Something to keep his warmth close, even if he wouldn't let me near. The cutting came first. I worked in silence, turning sleeves and hems into squares, smoothing wrinkles with the heel of my hand. I paused at the neckline of his soccer jersey, fingers hovering over the embroidered number. I hadn't gone to many games, but I remembered the sound of his voice on the phone afterward. Did you see my goal? I always said yes, whether I had or not. Then came the layout. I spread the squares across the dining table, moving them like puzzle pieces, trying not to think too hard about the order. I didn't want the quilt to be perfect. I wanted it to be real. Some squares were soft with wear, others stiff with memory. I added a few of my own scraps from one of my aprons, the blue gingham from the curtains in the guest room where he used to sleep, a swatch of denim from the overalls he wore as a toddler, square of his father's t-shirt, one he'd worn the day they built the treehouse together, the same shirt I had folded one last time after the accident. I stitched by hand even when my fingers ached, not out of stubbornness, but because it felt more honest that way. My thread wasn't always straight. Some corners puckered. A few stitches had to be redone. But it came together slowly in the quiet rhythm of needle and fabric and memory. Each night, I'd fold the quilt and place it beside the sewing basket. Each morning, I'd unfold it again. A ritual. A promised dot. As the weeks passed, the quilt began to take shape. It was heavier than I expected, not just in fabric, but in feeling. Like it had absorbed all the things I hadn't said aloud. I thought about giving it to him last Christmas. Then I thought better of it. A gift like that, given too soon, might feel like pressure or guilt. It might be misunderstood. And that quilt didn't deserve to be misunderstood. So instead, I folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box between the letter and the Polaroids. I tied it with a soft ribbon, pale green, the same color as the paint we once used for his bedroom walls. I left a small tag stitched into the underside, almost invisible. 3 words sewn in tiny, careful script. Still love you, I didn't expect him to notice the tag or to unfold the quilt immediately. But I hoped that one day when life had softened his edges and time had quieted his anger, he'd run his fingers over the stitching and feel what I meant. Because quilts aren't about keeping warm, They're about remembering what was worth holding together. Even when it came apart, it started with small questions, the kind that seem harmless on their own. Why doesn't Eli come to Sunday dinner anymore? Is he coming to the 4th of July picnic? Can I sleep in Eli's room when I stay over? Sophie asked most of them, her voice always soft, never prying, just curious in that honest way children are, before they learn which things adults avoid. The others, James, Nora, little Ben, they were younger. They mostly followed her lead. But even they began to notice the empty chair, the stocking that never came out, the name that no one said aloud. I didn't want to speak badly of him. Still don't. Whatever had passed between us, I refused to turn it into a story of blame or sides. He was still their cousin, still part of their fabric, even if the thread had loosened on my side. So I told the truth, or as much of it as I thought they needed. He's going through something. I said once when Sophie asked again why he hadn't come to her birthday. And sometimes people need space when they're hurting. She frowned. But he hurt. I looked at her, surprised. Why do you say that? Because you look sad when someone says his name. She wasn't wrong. Didn't answer right away. I just folded the napkins on the kitchen table a little slower. It's complicated. I finally said. She nodded like she understood, though she couldn't have. She was 10. Her world was still small, held together by hand-drawn cards and glitter glue and promises kept. But she was old enough to see when something had cracked, when the younger ones asked about the empty guest room. I told them Eli was busy with school. When they asked about the Christmas picture from 3 years ago, the last one where he was smiling beside them, arms slung carelessly around their shoulders, I just smiled and said, "That was a good year, wasn't it?" I kept my answers. Gentle, but real. I didn't want them to think love disappears when things go wrong. I didn't want them to grow up believing that silence means someone no longer matters. During one of their visits, Nora brought me a drawing. It was a house with a big tree, a crooked path, and 5 stick figures holding hands. "That's you," she said, pointing. "And that's all the grandkids." I looked closer. "Is that Eli?" I asked softly. She nodded. "I put him in because he's still in the family." Something caught in my throat. They were watching more closely than I realized, listening too, to the things I didn't say, so I started leaving small traces for them to find. A photo of Eli and Sophie on the fridge. A book he once read to them on the shelf in the playroom. His name included when I spoke about past holidays or family jokes. I didn't force it, made sure the outline of him stayed present. Children deserve honesty, but they also deserve hope. Okay? And I wanted them to know that distance doesn't mean erasure. That love is in conditional dots sometimes. They'd ask if he was mad at them. Did we do something wrong? Ben asked once, his voice trembling like a paper cup in the wind. "No, sweetheart," I said, pulling him into my lap. "Grown-up things are never the fault of children." He leaned his head against my shoulder and whispered, "I hope he comes back." "Me too," I said. "Me too." As time passed, the questions lessened. They adapted. Children always do. But I kept the space ready. I never let them believe he was forgotten. And when the day comes, if it comes, when Eli returns, I want there to be room for him in their hearts, uncluttered by bitterness, free from misunderstanding, because this isn't just about me and him. It's about all of us. About what it means to hold space for someone, even when they've stepped outside the circle. About showing the next generation that family can bend without breaking. That forgiveness isn't weakness, and silence isn't always final. So when they ask about him now, I say he's part of our story, and I let that be enough. For them, and some days, even for me, I'd set the table like I always did, tablecloth pressed, silverware aligned. Tulips from the yard cut fresh and arranged in the squat crystal vase my mother gave me when I turned 50. The ham was already in the oven, the rolls proofing on the counter under a clean dish towel. Carrot cake waited in the fridge. Every place had a name card. Every chair was where it had always been, except Eli's. That one I left bare. No plate, no fork, no little folded card with his name in cursive. Just the chair. I told myself it was easier this way, that putting out a setting he wouldn't use would hurt worse than leaving it empty. But when I stepped back to take in the whole room, the soft hum of the dishwasher, the smells wafting through the kitchen, the gaps stared back at me like a wound. Sophie noticed first. Children always do. She walked around the table once, her little shoes clicking on the floor. "Is Eli coming this year?" she asked, though she already knew. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Not this time." She didn't push. She just nodded and ran her finger along the edge of his chair. I saw her slip something into the cushion when she thought I wasn't looking. Later, after they'd gone, I found it. A paper tulip, carefully folded, colored in with pink crayon. No note, no explanation. It's just a quiet offering. The rest of the family arrived with their usual noise and casseroles. My daughter brought green beans. My son-in-law fixed the shaky leg on the back step. James and Nora hunted for eggs in the yard while Ben followed behind, shouting that he found them first. There was laughter, conversation, grace before the meal. And for a moment, I could almost forget the missing piece. Almost. But every time I glanced up from my plate, my eyes landed there on that empty space. I imagined what Eli might have said about Sophie's new haircut or the way Ben spilled his juice. I pictured him reaching for seconds, muttering about how no one else makes rolls quite like mine. I pictured him smiling just a little. Maybe. I wanted to believe he missed it too, that he thought about us on holidays, that some part of him looked at a calendar and remembered what this day used to mean. But wanting doesn't make it so. After dinner, I stood by the sink washing the good china by hand. The others offered, but I waved them off. Some chores are best done alone, especially the ones where memory sneaks up on you between soapy plates. I turned his chair inward, same as I always did when cleaning up. But this time, I paused. I sat. In it, I just sat there, damp hands in my lap, feeling the slight wobble in the right leg, the one I always meant to fix. I looked around the room from his view. The way the sun hit the sideboard, the crooked picture frame over the mantel, the faint stain in the ceiling where the roof once leaked. All familiar, all unchanged. How many meals had he eaten in that chair? How many times had he kicked his shoes off beneath it, leaned back too far, been scolded gently for playing with his fork? I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of his voice. Not the last time, the angry version, but the version from when he was younger. The way he used to say "Grandma" with the R drawn out like a secret. The way he used to whisper, "I love you more than jelly beans," when he thought no one was listening. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything. It's just presence. When I opened my eyes, the paper tulip from Sophie was still tucked into the cushion. I placed it on his plate and left it there. For the rest of the day, I didn't put the chair away. Didn't move it. Didn't try to hide it in another room like something broken. It stayed, because that's what you do with love. Even when it doesn't come home, you set the table, you leave the light on, you hold the chair open, just in case. It started gently. At first, a suggestion slipped into conversation like a teaspoon of honey in tea. Maybe if you reached out, someone would say, maybe if you just went first. My sister said it outright. You're the adult, Ida. He's still a boy, even if he's taller than you now. A neighbor mentioned it with a knowing tilt of the head. My grandson stopped talking to us for 2 years, but once my husband swallowed his pride and called him, everything changed. Even the pastor brought it up one Sunday after service. He caught me in the vestibule, hand on my shoulder. Sometimes the path to healing starts with the quieter voice. I nodded, polite, gracious. But inside, I felt like someone had opened a window in January, 'cause none of them had been in the room that night. None of them had felt the sting of those words, "You're dead to me," carve into a heart that had done nothing but try. They didn't know how I'd sat up that night, staring at Eli's childhood photo on my dresser, willing it to speak, to explain. They didn't know about the letter folded in my drawer, or the Polaroids, or the quilt, or the stocking tucked gently into the bottom of a box I still couldn't bring myself to seal. I didn't say these things out loud, 'cause people think. Reconciliation is simple. A phone call, a card, a moment of humility. But they don't see the layers, the years, the weight of everything that came before the break. It's not that I didn't want to apologize, it's that I wasn't sure what. I was apologizing for loving too much, for remembering his father, for making dinner and setting the table and trying to reach a boy who had already decided to turn away. Still, the question sat with me, like a guest who wouldn't leave. Should I go first? I thought about it while watering the roses, while folding towels, while watching Sophie blow bubbles on the porch. If I apologized, would it mean something? Or would it be another thing for him to ignore? Was I willing to risk silence again? One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with my daughter. We hadn't talked about Eli in weeks. But as she stirred her tea, she said quietly, "He's angry, Mom. He's angry and confused and 17. And he's hurting in ways he doesn't know how to say." I didn't answer. She added, "He doesn't know how to come back." The truth of that settled between us like dust in sunlight. She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. He needs a way in, even if he doesn't deserve it yet. That night, I sat in Eli's old room for the first time in months. The sheets were still folded neatly. The books on the shelf hadn't moved. I found an old plastic dinosaur under the bed, its tail bent. I held it in my palm like it meant something, and maybe it did. Maybe going first isn't about who was right. Maybe it's about choosing the relationship over the record. Choosing the door instead of the wall. So I opened the drawer, took out the letter. I didn't change the words, didn't soften anything. But I added a postscript at the end in my neat, looping script. "I'm sorry for the ways I've hurt you without knowing. I hope one day you'll forgive me, not because I was always right, but because I never stopped loving you." I sealed the envelope. I didn't mail it, not yet, but for the first time I set it beside my purse. Near the keys, near the door. Because maybe that's what forgiveness begins, with not sending the letter. But being ready too. Not forgetting what was said, but believing that love can still find a way through it, even when you're the one who goes first. The envelope was cream-colored and thicker than usual. I'd seen enough hospital mail over the years to know when something inside it was heavier than paper. I opened it at the kitchen counter, sunlight streaming in across the tile, cutting hard lines between shadow and warmth. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there reading the words over and over, letting them land like slow rain. Stage 2. Early, they said. Manageable, they said. With treatment possibly prolonged. But nothing is ever guaranteed when it comes to the heart. And mine, apparently, was tiring in ways I hadn't noticed, or hadn't wanted to. For the first few hours, I didn't tell anyone. Not my daughter, not my sister. I made tea and sat on the back porch listening to the wind move through the trees, like it always had. I watched the light shift across the yard and thought about how some changes happen suddenly, while others arrive in whispers, dressed like regular days. It wasn't the fear of dying that unsettled me. I've lived long enough to make peace with that. It was the unfinished things, the fragments of love still floating around without direction. The spaces I'd left open, waiting. I thought about the wooden box in the closet, the letter, the quilt, the Polaroids, the watch. All the pieces I'd collected, hoping Eli might one day be ready to receive them. I'd imagined a future version of Hamolder softened, maybe a father himself sitting at a table, opening the box slowly, piece by piece, finally understanding. But this diagnosis rearranged all that. I realized, with a kind of aching clarity, that I might not have as much time as I thought. That waiting for him to come back on his own might mean he never hears the things I want him to know. That night, opened the box again. I ran my fingers over each item like they were pages in a story I hadn't finished writing. I lifted the letter, still sealed, and held it against my chest. I hadn't looked at the contents in months, but I didn't need to. I remembered every word. They lived inside me, and then I made a decision. The next morning I called my attorney. I need to amend the delivery instructions, I said. If anything happens to me, hospitalization, not just death, I want the box sent to him. I was quiet on the other end. You're sure? Yes, I'll draw up the change. You'll need to come in and sign. I'll be there this week. After I hung up, I sat at the dining table for a long time. Not thinking, just breathing. The air felt heavier, but also clearer. It wasn't about finality anymore. It was about readiness. If I couldn't live to see the healing, I could at least make sure the message arrived. Later, I stood in Eli's old room. The bed was still made, his favorite book still on the shelf. I pulled it down the phantom toll booth. I flipped through the pages until I found the one he dog-eared years ago, his initials scribbled in pencil near the margin. I tucked the book into the box, not because it had value, but because it had history. That evening, told my daughter about the diagnosis. She sat with me on the couch, holding my hand like she used to when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. "We'll get through it," she said. "Whatever happens." I nodded and then, after a moment, I told her about the box. It does. She didn't interrupt. She didn't question. When I finished, she said, "You've been carrying this alone for too long." I thought he needed time. Maybe he still does, she said. But maybe he also needs you to go first. I smiled, tired. "You sound like your sister." She smiled too. I learned from the best. That night, I placed the box in a canvas tote and set it by the door, not hidden, not locked away, ready. Because timelines change, hopes shift, and sometimes the truth can't wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes it just has to arrive when it matters most, even if you're not the one there to see it opened. It was raining the day they gathered. Not a storm, not the kind that rattles windows or floods gutters, just a slow, steady drizzle that softened the edges of everything. The kind of rain that feels more like a hush than a disruption. They met in the attorney's office. It's the same one where I'd signed the papers years before. The same room with the 2 green carpet and the quiet ticking clock. Linda greeted them at the door, her smile subdued. No coffee was offered this time. Just tissues in small white boxes placed discreetly on the table. My daughter sat nearest, to where I once did, her hands folded tightly in her lap, lips pressed together in that quiet way she had when trying not to cry. Sophie sat beside her, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. The other grandchildren were there too, lined up like quiet echoes of the life I'd once known so vividly. And then there was Eli. He came in last, no announcement, no fanfare. Just a tall, quiet figure with his collar turned up against the rain, and his hands tucked into his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he sat down, just nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and stared at the floor. I wonder what he was expecting. Maybe, or nothing. Maybe a line in a legal document that said, "I leave to my grandson Eli." Whatever remains of what we couldn't say to each other. But that's not what he got. Mr. Callahan opened the folder slowly. His voice was measured, calm. The way it always was. He began with the basics, the division of property, modest funds, the small things that people fight over or forget entirely. It passed quickly, without tension. And then he said, "There is one item of personal importance left to Eli Morgan." Eli looked up. His name spoken aloud in that quiet room felt like the first real sound all day. Callahan reached down and lifted a box from beside his chair. The wooden box. It's the same one I'd filled piece by piece in the silence of my home. "This was prepared by your grandmother," he said gently. "She requested it be given to you directly, in her absence." Eli didn't move. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it into his lap. It wasn't heavy, not really, but he held it like it was. The room stayed still. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Callahan cleared his throat. She also left a note, he said. He unfolded a small piece of paper. It reads, "You don't have to open this now. You don't have to open it at all. But I want you to know, which is always for you. It was always love." Eli didn't cry. Not then, not in front of everyone, but his hand pressed to the top of the box, fingers splayed like he needed to feel it was real. The meeting ended quietly. Papers were signed. Conversations hushed. People gathered coats and umbrellas and said the kind of polite goodbyes that fill the space when no one knows what else to say. Eli didn't leave right away. He stayed in the chair, still holding the box long after the others had filed out into the gray morning. Linda offered to bring him tea, but he declined. Just shook his head, eyes down. Eventually, he stood, carried the box under one arm, jacket damp from the rain. He didn't speak to my daughter, didn't speak to Sophie. Just nodded again, barely, then walked out the door. But later, much later, my daughter told me something I hadn't known. She'd waited outside in the car just in case he needed a ride. She didn't expect anything. She didn't press. But she waited, and after a long while, Eli emerged. He stood in the doorway, box clutched to his chest, blinking into the rain like he'd forgotten it was there. Then quietly, he walked to her car and got in. They didn't say anything at first, just drove. But halfway home, he spoke. "I didn't think she'd leave me anything." "She did," my daughter said. "She left you everything that mattered." He nodded, then added, "I don't know if I'm ready to open it." "You don't have to be," she said. "You just have to want to try." Eli didn't reply, but he held the box tighter in his lap, and that was enough for now. He waited 3 days. The box sat on his desk unopened, its ribbon untouched. He passed by it each morning, dressed for school, keys in hand, earbuds in, pretending it wasn't there. But his eyes kept finding it, when brushing his teeth, when reaching for a glass, when he tried to sleep. The 4th evening, just after sunset, he sat down in front of it. The apartment was quiet. His roommate was out, the TV off. It's the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing below his window. He untied the ribbon slowly. Not like someone opening a gift, but like someone unwrapping something too fragile. Tarouche, the lid creaked faintly when he lifted it. On top was the letter. The envelope had no name, no address. Just his grandmother's careful handwriting, familiar even now. "For you," he hesitated. Then slid his finger beneath the seal and opened. The words inside were not long. They didn't explain everything. They didn't try to. They simply said what needed saying. That she loved him. That she missed him. That she remembered who he was long before anger came between them. That the door had never been closed, even when the silence made it feel that way. Beneath the letter were the Polaroids. He held them one by one in the low lamplight. Faint, slightly blurry edges, uneven. The pencil marks on the wall. The worn kitchen towel with a strawberry print. The swing in the yard. The front porch with the empty chair. A world he remembered, made still. He didn't cry, not then. He moved on to the book next the Phantom Tollbooth. His own copy. Spine cracked. Inside the cover, he found his initials from when he was 8, scribbled in pencil and circled 3 times. He smiled. Just barely. Then came the quilt, folded carefully, soft and heavy in his hands. He recognized the fabric instantly. Soccer jersey. A corner of his father's t-shirt. That ridiculous dinosaur pajama top he wore until it nearly fell apart. And stitched into the corner, almost hidden, "Still love you." He ran his fingers across the words like they might vanish if he blinked at the very bottom. Wrapped in tissue paper was the broken wristwatch. His father's. He turned it over and his hands traced the crack in the face. He remembered asking about it when he was a boy. Remembered slipping it on his wrist and pretending to be important. He didn't remember her saving it, but she had everything in the box. It was a memory as but. More than that, it was a truth he hadn't allowed himself to see. She hadn't walked away. She hadn't given up. He sat there for a long time, surrounded by all of it. The quilt draped over his lap, the photos fanned across the desk, the letter clutched loosely in one hand, and then quietly, almost imperceptibly, he began to cry. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that demands comfort, but the kind that comes when grief and regret meet understanding later. He folded the letter back into its envelope. He placed the book on his nightstand. He rolled the quilt and pressed it against his chest, like he used to do with his favorite blanket as a child. He didn't pack the box away. He left it open, right there, in the center of his room, so that in the morning when the sun came through the blinds and cast its light across his floor, he'd see it and remember what he'd almost lost. Not things, not keepsakes, but proof. Proof that he had been loved. Even in silence, even in distance, and maybe, just maybe still. It was a week before he came back. No announcement, no call ahead. Just a knock on the door late Saturday afternoon. When the light was soft and golden and the wind had settled for the day, my daughter answered, wiping flour from her hands. She had been baking something she did when her heart felt restless. The knock startled her. When she opened the door and saw Eli standing there, his hair unkempt, a duffel bag over his shoulder. She didn't speak at first. "Hey," he said. She stepped aside without a word. He walked in slowly, as though unsure the floor would still remember his weight. The hallway was the same. The coat rack still crooked. The faint smell of lavender and lemon wood polish clung to the air. He paused by the mantel. The photo of us was back. The one with the birdhouse and the big smile and the sun caught in his hair. I don't know when she put it up again. I didn't. Ask. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I forgot we used to laugh like that." My daughter didn't reply. She just waited. He asked if he could see my room. She nodded. He walked down the hallway, past the framed cross-stitch sayings, past the worn carpet that creaked in the same places. He stopped in the doorway. My bed was still made. The quilt, I sewed for myself, smoothed tight across the top. A vase of fading carnations sat on the dresser. The room was cleaner than usual, still waiting. He didn't touch anything, just stood there quiet. After a while, he walked to the backyard. The garden had grown wild in my absence, tomatoes sprawling. Rosemary bush too large for its planter. Weeds curling like questions between the paving stones. He knelt and pulled one weed from the edge of the walkway. Then another, and another. He stayed for hours. That evening, he asked to sleep in his old room. My daughter helped him change the sheets. He folded the blanket neatly, placed it at the foot of the bed. Then, from his bag, he pulled the quilta, one I made from his old shirts, and laid it across the bed like it belonged there, because it did. The next morning, he went to church. Sat in the back, quiet but present. Mrs. Atwood saw him and gasped. The pastor nodded at him from the pulpit after the service. He stood in the receiving line, hands in his pockets. People shook his hand. Some hugged him. Others simply nodded. He said very little. But when Sophie ran up to him and threw her arms around his waist, he hugged her back, tight, like something in him had returned. That afternoon, he went to the cemetery. He brought a single folded letter with him. Not the one I wrote, but one he had written in return. He sat by my stone for nearly an hour. No tears, just a boy now. A young man reading out loud to the wind. When he finished, he tucked the letter under the stone, weighed it with a flat rock, and whispered something no one heard. A week later, the wooden box arrived back at my daughter's house. Not empty, just different. Inside were new photos of Eli, standing on the porch, Eli weeding the garden, Eli with Sophie laughing. Beside him, there was a note addressed to no one. It's just a single line in his handwriting. She was never gone. I just didn't know how to return. My daughter wept when she read it. That spring, Eli joined a volunteer group that fixed up houses for veterans. He enrolled in a teaching program at the community college. He visited the courthouse where it all started and asked if there was a way to help. Grandparents navigating family estrangement. He told Sophie stories about when he was little. Let her sit on his shoulders to hang ornaments that Christmas. Made the carrot cake himself. On Easter, he took the empty chair at the table and didn't say a word. He just sat quietly, fully, and after dinner. He leaned down and whispered, too. The chair beside him where I would have sat. I kept everything, Grandma. I opened it all. I understand now. The wind moved through the trees just then, soft and low. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the house exhaled.